Hey guys, happy Monday. Your last Monday before you're off for Christmas break. That's exciting. You guys are kind of lucky. Grand Haven Christian still has school on next Monday and Tuesday, which is a big bummer for this teacher because I'll be still teaching. But you guys will be off having fun, doing whatever you do. So I hope you had a really good weekend. My weekend was actually full of work. Only because we are putting together a number of virtual choirs for the high school, which I hope that you'll watch. If any of you have ever been to our Christmas collage concert, it's usually a really big deal. It's really fantastic. We do it at the Frauenthal Theater in downtown Muskegon. It's all the choirs and all the bands, and we make it snow on stage, and it's super fun, and I'm really sad that we're not able to actually do it, but I am putting together some interesting little things, and so I'm sure that I'm hoping that's actually going to go out in a link to the whole school community in about a week, but it meant that my weekend was full of a lot of work putting it together. But I'm happy to be here right now talking to you guys. Happy to hear that the coronavirus vaccine is making its way to be distributed. I mean, I know that most of us won't necessarily get it for a really long time, or it won't even be available to us, but I don't know, it makes it feel like there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, and maybe things can go back to a little bit normal. I mean, it might be next school year before they're a little bit more normal, but boy, I can't wait for that, and I'm sure you can't either. So we're going to start off today just by doing a little bit of review of that medieval era sheet that we worked on to start with. You wrote me some definitions, and I picked those up, and Mr. Hill should have those to hand back to you today. But what I'll do, and I don't know a better way to do this because usually I do these kind of classes in person, but I'll ask you a question, then pause the video, find the answer, and then restart the video to see if you were right. I guess maybe that's the best way we could do it. So here goes. Music history has been divided into 6 main parts. What are those parts called? They're called eras. How can we identify each era? We identify it by what we hear in its music. What word describes the volume of music? That word is dynamics, and that's something that we don't talk about just with this very ancient music, but we talk about dynamics all the time in choir, in band, in music that you hear on the radio. Volume makes a difference. Okay, what is the word that describes the speed of the music? That word is tempo. And those are all ways that you can identify what time period the music is from. What is the name of the earliest time period of music? This should be a no-brainer. It's really big across the top of your paper. It's called the medieval era. We don't know that much about how music sounded then because there wasn't a lot of music notation. So since music wasn't really written down then, how did people learn it? They learned it by rote, which means they heard it over and over and over again until they had it memorized. Music notation did start to develop during this time. What were the earliest indicators of pitch called? They were called neumes, and they told the musician whether they were supposed to stay on the same note or go down or go up or hold it out. In order to ensure that their music would be performed precisely how they wanted it to be, where did they place the neumes eventually? That's right, they put them on a staff, which had 1 line, and then it had 4 lines, and then eventually it had 5 lines, and that's what we have now, and that hasn't changed for hundreds of years. We are accustomed to hearing music that has multiple parts and harmonies. What is another word to describe multiple parts and harmonies? Polyphonic. Is that how the music was during the medieval period? No, it definitely wasn't. what was the music like during the medieval period? It was primarily monophonic, which meant it just had one part or melody. What do you call music that doesn't have a religious theme and sounds a little bit more like folk music? That music is called secular. What about music that does have a religious theme? Right, that music is called sacred. Secular music was more popular during the medieval era, believe it or not, but who played a huge role in the development of the sacred music during that time? That's right, Roman Catholic priests. And just as an aside, I know that we talk a lot about priests and Catholic churches and things, but what you need to keep in mind was that was the church back then. It wasn't like you had the option to, I don't really want to be Catholic today, so I'm just going to head over here and be Baptist. Nope, there was no Baptist, there was no CRC, there was no like non-denominational, there was just the church, and that's what we know now as the Catholic Church. So some of you might be Catholic, I don't know, but that is that historical old church. And it was a huge, huge part of daily life back then. Most of the time, people did not read. Well, they just didn't read at all. A lot of people were not literate at all because they were in the servant class. And so they would go to the church multiple times per week, and the priest would tell them lots of things, and they would say that these things came from the Bible, but there was no way for the average person to really know because they couldn't read. So, and even if they could read, do you know what language the Bible usually was printed in? I bet you know. Yeah, it was printed in Latin. And so that would be like, you go to your church and maybe like in the seats or in the pews, there are these Bibles and you want to check out what the pastor is saying to verify if it's true or not. And you open it up and it's totally in Latin. And you're like, this does me no good. So either I can reject the teachings of the church, which would get you rejected from society if you said that back then, or you can just take what the priests say as the word of God, because how are you going to know any differently? And so, unfortunately, there's a lot of corruption that went on back then. The priests became very wealthy because basically they would say, you're not going to be able to go to heaven because of the sins you've committed, but if you pay me a specific amount of money, I'll make sure to talk to God and I'll get you in because, I'm a priest, I can do that. And the people believed it because how were they gonna know any differently? So I just add that little bit in there so that you understand like why the church was so powerful and so important during that time, and why it was a lot of the way that music was transmitted from person to person, because that's where the people were all the time. There were social gatherings, which is where the secular music was, but people were at church all the time and they were hearing those chants. That's good. What kind of music was more common during that time? Vocal music? Instrumental music? Nope, it was vocal music, mostly because, a lot of instruments that we now know hadn't been invented at that point. Our modern guitar wasn't invented yet. Probably a precursor to the guitar had been invented. There was no piano. There's no piano. A lot of the things that we take for granted just didn't even exist. So most of the music that you heard was being sung. All right, in the next video, we're going to review a little bit more about Hildegard, and we're going to learn about another medieval composer.